Okay, so I'm doing a presentation on creature and animal animation. I started being an animator in, gosh, what is it, 95? So I've been doing this for about 18 years. I started in the industry, in the feature film industry. Let me get this here. Just to give you my background, these are the projects that I've worked on in the past and a little bit of my education. War in the North primarily is what I'm going to be focusing on this one, so I'm going to have a lot of examples of the great eagles. Okay, so kind of did a slide process, you know, a little less impromptu, but so here we go, animal and creature animation. So basically this is a breakdown of the way that I think about things. Starting off with the inspiration and understanding. When I get a character, what is that and what does that do? Oh, hello. New. Okay, and then I go through anatomy, and it's an application to rigging and animation. I'm going to go over that briefly. Animation and overview of base movement, and emoting and character development, and then finally cinematics, telling the story and bringing everything together. On War in the North, I basically had the opportunity to take the great eagle from the start to the end. And that means rigging and skinning and then doing the animation for gameplay and then also cinematics. I was also able to storyboard and do full sequences, kind of got some of that handed off to me. So I was able to do it like really from start to end, which was pretty amazing. It was a lot of fun to do. So starting off with inspiration and understanding, observation through life and media. Obviously, a lot of us get a lot of information from YouTube, the internet, films. A lot of it's inspiring and inspirational. Then you come to process that information. How do you do that? Coming from a traditional background, I have a tendency to draw and do a lot of sketches and emoting that before I bring it into the 3D program. Then there's experience through exposure. I think that there's some really good lessons of throwing yourself out there and actually doing some of these things instead of just observation. So going on to observation through life and media, here's a really good example. For Brother Bear, we wound up being able to go to a zoo called Silver Springs, and we were able to get back behind the scenes and actually look at some of these grizzly bears up close. There was only that fence protecting us from that bear. And so this guy Tom, for some reason he took a liking to him. So what I'm saying here is like having a bear actually walk up to you and feel his breath on you, feel that huffing, moving, feel the weight, feeling that it almost bends space and air around it. It's so large. It's just, and feeling that visceral contact is so much better than going and watching it on YouTube. It's amazing, and you feel that intimidation. The whole reason why these guys, they're killing machines. They like to sleep and eat other things, but they are killing machines. This really gives you that first-hand experience of like, wow, this guy could rip my face off in like 2 seconds. So again, here's another picture. That's really intimidating. You see this big thing. I mean, it's just so ginormous. Its hands are like right there, you know, in your face, propping himself up. It's an amazing experience. So I guess in essence, try to get out there and go to the zoo, go and interact, you know, see if you can find some way of getting behind the scenes in some of these places. Great places to go to is rescues and rehabilitation, wildlife rehabilitation centers. You can actually kind of volunteer sometimes and get some hands-on experience with some of these creatures. Really lots of fun. So here's some sketches and doodles, like I was saying before, about recording your experiences. I started going through and started experimenting with the volumes and the shapes and really starting to turn this character in my head before even applying it into the format of animation. It really helps you see in your brain the 3D in your head. So move on, and then sketches. You know, some more great eagle references, starting to simplify these characters down, seeing how they pose through their silhouettes by simplifying these shapes, and starting to experiment with movement patterns and poses, also helping to record how their attitude is when they're just generally hanging out. This is an example from a slide from Drawn to Life. Excellent book. I have to recommend this to pretty much anybody interested in animation. It's the Walt Stansfield lectures, and this is a sample of Andreas Deja's sketches from Going to the Zoo for Lion King. Simplistic, showing the attitude, breaking down. There's sweeping movements. You can see the movement there. But that book, I definitely recommend that, because it goes into not only just the sketching processes and the actual act of sketching, but it also goes into, where'd it go? It also goes into the thought process that these animators go into, describing what they're thinking when they're recording this information. It's really good. There we go. Ha! I did a lot of horseback riding, and I think that has influenced the way I handled weight, volume, and understanding animals and their interpretation. So me and my big goob horse, we used to go do jumping and going out in the woods and all that stuff. Really cued me into his subtle behavior. This kind of stuff I found really important, being able to read another animal that obviously doesn't speak my language. We had a common language. Watching his ears twitch and move. I always knew, oh, he's looking off over something at there, because his ears were aimed towards that direction. The little ticks, the little movements, the little kind of let me know what he was thinking at the time. It kind of made things a lot easier in understanding the simplification of these gestures that we as humans take advantage of in normal conversation. That helps me a lot. And also, like, feeling that weight. He's a big guy. That's a 2,000-pound horse. So when you're on his back and he takes a step, you feel that movement, that settling. And I think that's great. Another great thing is scuba diving. I would not recommend skydiving because I won't do it, but if you feel fine doing it, that's great. Giving that sensation of, or understanding what it feels like to be free falling with air hitting your skin and off. But I won't do that. The horseback riding is about as extreme enough as me. The scuba diving is great though too, because it gives you it puts you in an environment where you're not comfortable. It makes you feel like, well, it does. It makes you feel like you have a completely different weight and volume and movement. How do you move in this environment? You kick, you paddle. I found that when I went scuba diving, that it made it a lot easier to start thinking about myself as an animal and moving through the water like an animal would. So, observations to practice. Basically, this was where I said, okay, forget Muybridge, forget like all my reference material, forget all of my books. I'm just going to sit down and do this from my head. And it really opened my eyes, because like I realized I really messed up. This isn't right. The middle line here, it has the front legs completely flipped. They should be flipped the other direction. There's a left leg with right. It really helped me out, like within a sense of, hey, blatantly obvious, smack me in the forehead. I thought I was right, but I'm not. Practicing stuff like this and testing yourself on a regular basis helps it set in your head, so that next time you're called on to do this for production, it winds up helping you and be faster. Thumbnails, going through and starting to break things down. Visually, this is another sketch. Purpose of going in and analyzing the movements so that you understand it before you even put it into the program. Okay, so now I'm going to go into anatomy and its application, understanding through comparative anatomy, understanding anatomy and movement, and breaking the skeleton down to more manageable components, and a brief showing of the eagle rig. Here's some handouts from Disney. Way back in the day, I wish I knew who had done these, because I would give them credit. But it's basically going over like the simplicity of how we are all pretty much constructed the same way. So let you look at that. The shoulder blades, primarily the biggest difference between the front end on a horse and a dog, or a person and a dog. The scapula, the way it rests on the rib cage, is functional in the sense that you've got a character or a animal that has its gut slung underneath him, so their rib cage is shaped slightly different. On a human, we have more of a, in this diagram on the left bottom corner, more horizontal rib cage, and this is because we have clavicles. Most animals actually do not have clavicles, but that is for our support system for our arms. Animals do not have that. Their scapulas generally slide along the sides of their rib cage. Another breakdown of anatomy, really similar. We all have the primarily same structures. We all have scapulas, upper arms, lower arms, hands, and fingers and toes. Again, comparative anatomy on the bat. This area is really interesting because on the left-hand side you see the back side of a bat, and it looks like if you cut away the wings, it looks just like a human, or very similar. Come on. There we go. And again, a similar breakdown of the different portions and parts of the anatomy. Bat wings are really used quite often in fantasy characters. Again, more of a lesson on anatomy. Even though dogs and horses do not have collarbones, dogs, yes, have pectoral muscles. So, like in Ren and Stimpy, Ren has pecs. I don't know if you remember that old guy. He actually did have them. A lot of people were like, dogs don't have pectoral muscles. But they do. And then the back legs, hind limbs. This one really flabbergasted me when I started looking at it. In the middle, on the left is a horse, in the middle is a human, and on the right is a lion. And amazingly enough, the relationship, the human and the lion are really dang similar. And then another thing, I know I usually have a tendency when I'm talking to people about the bone structures on animals, I just always say, oh, it's the thigh, oh, it's the heel. So people always are like looking at me saying, horses don't have heels. And I'm like, yes, they do. You can see right here, they have the same foot structure, it's just positioned differently. So, okay, so here's something I found on the internet, and part of the, yeah?
How likely so they can hear you a little bit better than that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, am I moving out too much? Sorry about that, guys. I mumble. Is that better? Okay, good. So, yeah, with my horseback riding and my really liking animals and finding reference, I was surfing around and seeing, I found this, which is the Visible Horse in Motion. It's a program where they actually paint anatomy on the horse and record it and do sessions and showing how the horse moves. And in the horseback riding industry, this is really actually pretty critical to make sure that everybody knows how animals move because of their health. If you've got a sport horse you've invested a lot of money in, you need to know when it goes lame and the structures and the anatomy and how it moves and its function. So you actually find a ton of this source material online for just observing, and starting to understand skeletal movement in animals. Horses are a great reference. So here's the video. You see the way that the neck bone is flexing in the scapula and the upper arm. And the thigh bones. You see how those limbs are collapsing. Horses, a lot of people think horses are pretty rigid because they've got these skinny, long legs. They actually have a really nice compression and extension system for support. They've got struts. And a lot of it is from the hip bone into the knee and then the shoulder into the upper arm. Okay, so now one thing I'm going to go into is for gaming in specific, breaking down the skeleton to more manageable components. A lot of the time, as an animator, the less bones you have to move around, the easier your job is. But otherwise, you know, sometimes you're risking performance. So being able to understand where those points should be. Here's an outline, basically breaking it down. NPC dialogue, close range, player character, these should be your highest bone count. Combat, quick, close range, you know, medium bone count. You don't need to be concentrating so much on detail. Some facial expression, but not too much. And then ambient. It depends on whether your ambient creature is close or far. If it's a bird, yeah, low bone count. If it's like, say, a horse that you walk up to, you don't interact with, you want to have a little bit more visual fidelity for that, so you add a little bit more bones. So here's a breakdown of the rib cage and the pelvis and the torsion movement between the two. One thing I have to say, I've seen some occasions where I've seen a lot of rib or spine bones put in on an animal, and in reality you don't need to put that many in. If you're going to have like extra from the spine bones, put them in the neck. It reads so much better. Because on a horse, their rib cage is really pretty solid. You don't see it flexing like macaroni. You know, you don't see a curve in it. That's one solid mass of lung, heart tissue underneath that rib cage, and it's not going to bend. You don't need more than really one spine bone to represent the rib cage. So I would say take those extra spine bones and throw them in the neck. You'll find that you'll have a lot more expressive ability in that. So here is a pose test of the great eagle. Went through. It was an interesting situation with the eagle. When it was first brought up, I ran to my lead and said, can I have this? Can I please have this character? And he said, okay. So at that point in time, we were still kind of rigging our own characters, and I was rigging my own creatures and animals that I'd been doing for previous projects. But it was thrown up here that how do you fold those wings up and still have fidelity for full extension and full compression against the body? It was a really difficult task to get that to work with the minimal bone count possible. So I worked with a modeler, Fred, for quite some time, about 7 days just on the proxy model on this guy, just to get these systems folding in together and working properly. And then he moved on and started iterating on that. But here's an example of the pose test just going through. The different movement and motion. And these were all kind of extremes. And yes, this is biped. A lot of people poo-poo biped, but I like it because I can throw it in there and not mess with it too much. So they suggested that I do two models, one with a full extension and one with a fully combined leg for conversation. So I was like, no, let's try to combine and not do two models, two meshes, two rigs. Let's combine it into one, because I was really afraid it was going to get cut, because that was a lot of memory to be dedicated to just one guy. So I really worked on getting that to function properly. Here's an outline of the wing moving, breaking it down into the different components. Those red sections there on the shoulders were my lifesaver, because what they basically did is when I folded up the wing, all that extra material that didn't like to accordion in on itself very nicely could get covered up by that shoulder blade. On. Here's an example of the facial rigging. This was the setup for face effects. This guy, yeah, we used face effects throughout the game. There were just way too many lines. Fortunately, at the end, I was able to have a little bit of time and go over all of the face effects lines that were set up for him. Some of them were better than others, but here we go. Here's just a move through. So he has 28 bones in his face. Okay, move on. Okay, so this is a quick overview of the base movement. Quads, breakdown of gaits, avians, and then bringing this all together to other than just your stock standard cycling. Basic, real brief, walk, 4-beat, simple. This is an NPC way background character, so you can see how the biped's set up, and you can see, well, yeah, it could be like a human. See that little beanie head right there. And again, that's kind of like showing like the comparative anatomy in play. The biped actually really emphasizes that, which is cool. Here's a Brie horse from War in the North walking along, although that was never used, unfortunately. We just had him standing next to the bar. But yeah, again, just subtlety and movement, the rocking action. The neck, the neck can really, again, the extra neck bones really make a huge difference in the movement. Again, a breakdown of the trot. Trot is 2-beat. Boing, 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 boing. I love this gait because you can express a lot when you're starting to work with more in depth in character movement. And I really put a lot of spring in him. Again, the biped moving, showing you the comparative anatomy. Okay, so here's a breakdown. A lot of people have asked me in the past, or one of the things that usually gets asked is gallop and runs. There is a pretty big difference between these two types of runs. One is, the one on the top here is really primarily used by horses. It's called a transverse gallop, and it only has one phase of suspension. It's one thing the way I visualize it every single time I sit down and I work with an animal, a quad that would do a run, I try to break it down into these two movements. The one on the bottom is the Rotary gallop, which has 2 moments of suspension. These are generally used by cheetahs and dogs. I retract this a little bit. In gaming, you don't have many moments where you can use the bottom one, unfortunately, because the character is on screen and off screen so fast, the stride movement, especially when you're working with large creatures. Short or small, tiny, compact creatures, you can do this in, and they'll stay on the camera long enough for the viewer to actually see. But for larger, which is typically the case in gaming, the larger, more massive creatures, they won't run like this, unfortunately. I've tried. It doesn't work. So yeah, here's the suspension moment in the transverse, and then here's the suspension moments. Oops. Suspension moments. Here's just some examples of the bounds, and which is like the Rotary gallop, and then a canter, which is a slower version of the gallop. So this is kind of bringing it all together. I was put on the scene. It had been set up, and I was put on because the animator for this was moved on to another scene. So I kind of took over and went through and did the warg on this. This is from War in the North. So, and then he trots off. So he stops, he comes in, trots off, emotes, does a yowl, and then runs off. What was interesting about this scene, too, is that this was the one and only, or one of the very few times you saw wargs in the game, and this was supposed to be kind of a big reveal, but unfortunately cut into gameplay so much that the original version of it was way too long. And I could feel that there was just too much time spent on the cinematic, so you cut into gameplay too much. So cut it down short, made it a short introduction. Here we go, we're going to make a moment. Know that so the player will know that he's there, and creating a potential issue in the future. So, oops. Okay, so going into forward flight movement, just a crow, a simple example. This is a really low poly rig. The neck bones are actually not skinned, but it really creates that good silhouette of flight movement. And then the great eagle, much slower, more laborious. and all of his bones moving around. He has, I don't think I mentioned, he's got about 137 bones in him. There's a lot to animate. Here's an example of takeoff. So we had the player characters being able to mount them and take them to different areas. So here's an example of a takeoff. Just gets on and says, hey, let's go. And all of his bones. And then some examples of landing, the same kind of a situation where you're landing into a new area like Rivendell or whatever. These are a generic introduction to new levels. And here's his bone. And a little crow. So here's some more examples. This is, again, like bringing all of this base movement information and putting it into presentation form. The one on the left is just really one of the first examples that we showed when selling the eagles in the game, particularly for cinematics, but hopefully we were hoping that maybe we could have some characters flying in like this during gameplay. But this is just a really rough block in, so there's a lot of flipping in different type of, there's a wireframe flip in there for a second. So it wasn't intended to be a full cinematic, it was just to show, okay, we can do this. And then next is, it's got some dialogue, so I hope I don't blast you guys. Turn it down just a minute. But this is one of the early tests for the Great Eagles, making sure that, you know, we've got audio and everything's playable on this guy.
Very well, but I shall be close by. Call if you have need of me.
Nope. Well, I guess I don't have audio. Okay, well, we'll move on. I could say what he's saying, but I can't remember. So, okay, so going on to emoting. Okay, so understanding developing your character. Body posture and silhouette is really important, breaking down facial expression and dialogue. You know, this is all about comparative anatomy and comparative emoting, too. More notes from Disney. This was really good to know, or a good way of thinking about it early on. If you ever have a moment where you're trying to emote with an animal, some of the best ways to do it is just breaking it down into a human character and getting that essential pose out in a human, and then applying those same principles onto a animal or a creature. I love the little ball boy in the middle, you know, with his proud dog. He's all proud, and so is his dog. You know, these are really pushed to extreme poses, and sometimes like going through and thinking about these poses, even though you've got a serious character or a character that's really never going to assume this kind of a pose because it would be too cartoony, going in through and understanding the extremes originally is a really good idea, or at least pushing it. Here's a little guy that I like to play around with when I'm getting like really serious stuff, like, you know, things getting limbs ripped off and all that stuff. This is my little guy named Luther. And so as an example of developing your character, I like to throw him around a little bit and make him, he's really adorable and cute and fuzzy, and maybe that's because I'm trying to touch my inner child instead of thinking about severed, decapitated heads and flying all over the place because the eagle is ripping them off. So he's a lot of fun to work with, and he helps me visualize like different poses. He's my go-to character whenever I want to like try to push something. Again, here's some more development, like, you know, a little sexy character, you know, a little sultry, and then just kind of basic fun little things. Some facial expression using the old trusty model from Disney. Breaking things down visually in your mind, it really helps you. On this guy, he actually taught me a lot about dialogue on animals. Because he really doesn't have, I mean, he's got these huge dew flaps on the front of his head, you know, and it's like covers up most of his mouth most of the time. I found that he does most of his emoting, his emotional, connective emoting, through the corners of his mouth and his eyes and his cheeks. And doing these kinds of like sketches and kind of emoting, understanding that emotion helped me realize that when I went to the great eagle, well, great eagle has a big beak, you know, it's hard. You can't change that around very much. You can't squish it, and it's just, it would look weird. So I took this information and really kind of put that into the great eagle by saying, okay, a lot of it happens right here in the face. It's not all about the lips doing dialogue. It's a lot also with the face. And then some more fun. You know what? This might not actually work because I don't think I have audio. Let me try this one just to see if it will work. It's not working.
Take heart! We on it?
That's what I was afraid of happening. Let me turn that down here a little bit. Wah! Whoa. There we go. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. Go ahead and start off a little earlier.
Take heart! We are nearly there, and this snowfall will hide us from the eyes of the enemy below. Balaam, look! Above the mountain!
So this was a really fun scene. I got to do more than one eagle, and put those shots together. But yeah, emoting with the face was really, there's a lot of jaw flap on animals. And so it makes it a little easier to animate because you're not like putting in, what was it, one time, someone told me once that humans are so difficult to animate for dialogue. The reason is because you're human, you're a person. You know and can read unconscious movements, and you know the subtlety of another individual that's standing right in front of you talking to you. With animals, that's different. You don't have to worry so much because you really don't know what's going on in their heads, so you can play a little bit more. So animals actually can be very much easier to animate as far as the dialogue goes. Okay, so I'm going to go, let's see, how are we doing on time? Going step by step through cinematics, just kind of, when I worked on War in the North, these were kind of the steps that I took to creating some of these cinematics. Planning, you got to plan and communicate. You got to understand where this is going and coming from. Storyboards, doing some storyboards, block in of components, and then you got to iterate. Okay, so planning and communicate. Why is the sequence in the game? What is the drive? This is basically the story. Communicating with others on where this is coming from and going to. Like with the Great Eagle, knowing, okay, well, is this a part of the story where he's still a little bit aloof of the players, or is this when he's really committed to helping out the players? Understanding those purposes and seeing what you're going to be doing with the characters in this. Also, what is the entertainment potential? Where can that be emphasized? This is really integrated more with design. What is this portion of the game that we're talking about? Is this a reveal to a new area? Is this, or is this a cause and effect type of cinematic? Is this a story motivator? Also, you know, what should I have the character do and how can I best show it? Animation effects and layout, understanding those principles before you even go on to move on to doing storyboards. Know exactly what you want before you start and talk to everybody who might potentially be involved. Because there's nothing worse when you start to commit to a sequence of shots and then somebody says, you can't do that. It's really annoying. Especially when you're like, oh, this scene was so awesome and I wanted to show it, and they're like, no. Okay, so some storyboard principles. So when you're going in and doing storyboards is like understanding where the characters are posed in the environment. Lighting, I have a tendency to put a lot in my storyboards where I put in lighting too. Kind of like looking at the whole picture. How many actions and dynamics are to be considered? What is the game action before and after the shots? Obviously very important. How are the characters positioned? You have to check for your continuity. Again, within shots, you can't have those characters flipping around and moving because it breaks the flow and the continuity of the shots. Plan on who, what will be on the camera and when, and being conscious of the tempo. Tempo is really important. You linger too long on one moment or too short, people won't get what you're trying to say. Start thinking about shot variations, what kind of shots, long, medium, pans, truck-ins, starting to take the action and starting to put a tempo to or a pace to that movement in the shots. It's what I generally do when I'm doing storyboards and setting it up. Pacing the cuts, basically in more thoughtful moments, much slower action, much slower cuts, the exact opposite for high action. Lots of faster cuts, showing the moments in which you need to see that interaction change from different points of view. Some storyboards from Mirkwood. This is the introductory scene where you get knocked off of the Great Eagle and you get knocked into the forest and you confront the Fellbeast rider for the first time. On this one, I really wanted to use lighting, so I did a lot of light and dark variations and tones instead of just black and white drawings. Because Mirkwood was really dark, I really wanted to emphasize you're coming from a really light, airy environment. Flying on the Great Eagles, you get knocked off into this murky forest, and all of a sudden you meet up with this big, creepy bad guy. Here's some examples of War in the North, Carndoom 250. This is a sequence that I'll be showing a little bit later on, but there's a lot of high action sequences. This one was a lot of fun because it had a lot of diversity of emotion. It starts off with kind of an establishing shot. You get confronted by the Fellbeast, you're like, oh no. And then the Great Eagle comes in and saves you by just basically creaming him. But he's wounded at the same time. So at the very end, you kind of have this kind of close emotional moment with him. So it was really diverse. It was really fun to work on that. So setting up and blocking in of the components. This is your animatic phase. You go in and you just take really rough environments and start planning your shots. This is crucial to your cinematic moments because you'll figure out exactly when and where you can go. You'll be able to see, okay, well, this environment needs to be drawn out a little bit further. And a lot of the time, that's when they'll say, you can't do this. Because I was working with a lot of in-game assets. Actually all in-game assets. And so there were some limitations to the environments. And especially with the flight sequences, I really wanted to show, okay, well, he's flying. He's a big guy. He's flying through the air and show a lot of panning shots. And that was difficult because a lot of these environments were not built that way. They were built for gameplay from, a person's point of view. And then checking your layout, make sure that there's any additional art issues. This is also where you can actually start discussing and playing with ideas with effects, explosions, smoke, other things to express like the storytelling process that aren't necessarily in your department. So here's an example of a block-in for Carndoom. Oops. Get you down there. Don't want to blast you guys again.
Belleron, they send trolls against the gate. Come, we will drive them back. Berenthor, to the gate.
Beware! Beware! Really rough block-in of the effects there. But visually it helps you tell how big the space you need to do this stuff. So the big baddies come in the end and then you start the battle. So yeah, that's basically outlining, okay, well here's all the information that you need to create this sequence, and then, going to and making requests or just going ahead and animating it. Okay, last but not least, iterate, iterate, iterate. I could probably still be working on all of these scenes that I've done if somebody didn't say, stop. So it's really important to keep working on and developing. You fall in love with something, but then you question yourself, and then you keep on doing it, and then finally you find where, okay, this is a niche, this reads, this is exactly what I wanted to show. So here's an example of the storyboard that I showed earlier. This is for the Mirkwood sequence. So this is where you take that visual artwork and you start timing the shots out. You start saying, okay, this moment's quick, this is a fast cut, this is a slow bringing in, so that an establishing shot. You see the baddie come in, action moment, and this is early on, this is before where we had 3 characters in the cinematic, and then showing a little bit of the effects and the timing. So there's that, and then here is a more of a realized version. These guys flying around.
Seeking the wizard. No one can help him now, and no one can help you.
Okay, so that's close to the end, last bit of iteration before it went to final. Here's the one with the full audio and full rendering in the game. Just to kind of point out, for all the creatures that I'm showing, these are all kind of hand key stuff. All the humanoid characters are mocapped, so I did not do all the animation on those guys, but it was fun working on the radio. Well, now here's one last example. I think this is my last one, and this is Cardoon, and this is the one that I was telling you about that it was a little bit of more fun because it had a lot of different emotional changes. Oh, hello. I didn't mean to do that. There we go. And it's amazing how much audio really does make a difference. Oh, poor Bellaram. So, and that was the block in, and so now I'll show you the final with the audio. And again, the audio really helps. it, I wanted to give everybody some resource material too. I'm kind of old school. I've been doing this for a while, and this was before the internet, so I got a lot of reference material before then. So animals in motion, like here's basically a full list of what I like to use when I refer to when I think about doing new scenes or just inspiration. So I'm sure this will be posted on the video later on. So that's about it. I'm ready for, if anybody has any questions, I hope I'll be able to answer them, but thank you very much. Questions?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, question. You mentioned observing real life, going to zoos and observing animal behavior, and then using that in your animation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's not working. No? Okay. Yes. Okay. Right. Right. So the question was, how do I basically collapse the eagle's wings and making that kind of a clean and clear? And so the method that I wound up doing with that was when it's all hand key. And it's wrestling with the bones. There was no procedural setups there. I didn't have the time to do that. Again, I iterate. I'm really not I don't know that much about setting up full skeletal structures, so that's why the biped was really great for me, because I can go in and skin and then go from there with animation. But what it was is we did have the ability to translate bones along with rotate. So this shoulder piece, it was a piece of geometry that was V-shape. So when all that wing geometry kind of accordioned in on itself, getting that managed, the lower primary feathers were displayed pretty much full force, but anything up in here had to be folded in on itself, and that's what that little shoulder piece was. It was a big V, and I could lift it up depending on the situation, lift it up and then push it down to kind of seal that off and make it a little bit cleaner, because it was quite a nightmare to keep that under control. And there were a lot of, again, those wing bones, all of that's hand key. So it was quite a lot of work. But did that answer your question? Yeah. Excellent. Go ahead. Oh.
Hi. Just had two questions, actually. That first sequence, first one.
Oh, you're breaking up on me.
Hello? Hear me?
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we got a problem with that.
No. Can I speak loud?
Go ahead.
The sequence that you showed storyboards for with the dude knocking the other guy off the bird and then the thing in the forest, did you storyboard all that?
Mm-hmm.
So how much support do you have? How much are you expected to do where you are in terms of like rigging and selling a story? Like, that's my first question. And like the follow-up question would be like, how much time do you have to do all that?
Right. On that production, I had kind of a jack of all trades job, and then the question basically was, the rigging process, and the storyboarding. What was my job outline, and how much time did I have to do it? So my job outline during that time, yes, I was rigging. I was setting up. I did not do technical rigging in the essence of setting up collision systems or havoc or things like that on these characters, but I did animate the characters on the cameras. I was kind of like on the ground force before WB brought in cinematics crew, their own independent cinematics crew, to start working on these sequences. And so I had started off kind of this pathway of like, I was essentially the lead cinematic animator for this production. And so I started off this process, and they kind of like let me do this for the Eagles for the rest of the game. So I did not animate every single Eagles sequence in this game, but I did most of them, and of course that's because of time restrictions. I did a lot. So it was more of an ownership of the character. I kind of expressed in the very beginning wanting an ownership of character. Coming from a traditional background, we are divided up by character on traditional animation films. So, you know, on the past I may have worked on Lilo, of Lilo and Stitch. That was my primary character. So I kind of wanted to take that ownership and move that character in the right or in that direction, and go with it from there. So it was more of a consistency issue. Also, I knew the character well enough. We were bringing in a lot of new people at the time, so there was a lot of, you know, influx, and they said, "Oh, just keep going on it." So I don't know. It was fun. It was a good experience too, because I actually got to do all that stuff too. So exactly. That's really hard to say because I was doing gameplay animation at the same time. So I would say on average each cinematic sequence was probably about a month. I had about a month to work on each one, and I did, I think it was 6 or 7. So that, and then on top of that, doing gameplay animations for the Great Eagle. So I also did quite a few other rigging, like some of the horses and stuff for the cinematics department.
Did that month include the storyboards?
The month included the storyboards. Okay, so I guess I need to wrap up now. It's lunchtime. Everybody eat. So thank you very much. What?